The flickering amber light of the holding cell cast long shadows across the floor. Leo Vance sat cross-legged, staring at the scuffed leather toe of his left boot. He counted the prominent stitches, exactly 14, sewn by hand with copper filament during his 9th winter in the underground shafts of Sector 9. On Earth's forgotten fringe colonies, you didn't throw away a boot when the synthetic leather split from acid sludge exposure. You patched it with discarded wire left behind by heavy corporate diggers. That was the primary rule of the Outer Rim. Everything could be salvaged, and nothing was truly broken until it was melted down for scrap. The heavy pneumatic seal of the cell door groaned, releasing a sharp hiss of pressurized air that smelled of ozone and military disinfectant. Commander Valen stepped into the cramped space. The Taurian officer was a towering figure of rigid angles, his gray, stone-textured skin reflecting the harsh geometry of the Galactic Scout Academy's command tier. Valen kept his 4 primary eyes fixed on the glowing interface of the data slate resting in his lower left manipulator. Your academic record is an exercise in utter futility, Cadet Vance, Valen spoke, his voice carrying the characteristic dry, grinding resonance of his species. Your scores in advanced quantum navigation are the lowest the department has recorded in 3 solar cycles. You consistently failed to calibrate the subspace particle arrays during simulation drills, opting instead to bypass the safety relays with crude mechanical splices. Leo didn't shift his position. He simply shrugged, his hand drifting to the small, scratched metallic casing of the modified hover cam clipped to his equipment belt. With all due respect, Commander, a simulation doesn't tell you how a copper line behaves when sub-zero humidity hits the manifold. The textbook says calibrate via software. Experience says if the wire is freezing, you bypass the board or the whole rig blows. Valen's upper mandibles twitched in annoyance. He tapped the screen, transferring a new template to the terminal built into the cell wall. A crimson warning emblem began to rotate slowly, illuminating the dark room with a blood-red pulse. The Academy has no use for primitive pragmatism, Cadet. However, protocol dictates that a cadet from the lower quadrant be assigned to high-risk validation tasks. You are being deployed to Planet X-90. The local charting units refer to it as the meat grinder. 5 solar cycles ago, an elite reconnaissance squad of my own species landed there. They survived less than 1 planetary rotation. Leo leaned back against the cold bulkhead, his expression unchanged as the red light continued its rhythmic pulse against his face. X-90, he muttered, turning the designation over in his mind. The corporate logs from the old automated flybys mentioned a high-density atmospheric soup. Heavy sulfur precipitates, unstable alkaline tables, and an organic canopy that actively targets kinetic heat signatures. Sounds like a charming place for a walk. Your casual demeanor is born of ignorance, Commander Valen stated coldly, shutting down his data slate with a sharp click of his chitinous fingers. The planet kills through systemic degradation. The atmosphere is dense enough to compromise standard filtration seals within hours. The liquid tables possess an acidic index that strips the protective coating from standard military alloy. But more importantly, the apex xenofauna of X-90 is a localized nightmare designated as the Gorgon, a biological entity that tracks prey through the detection of bioelectrical fields and adrenaline. The Taurian officer stepped closer to the cell barrier, his shadow completely engulfing Leo. The casualty report for your mission has already been pre-authorized by the Administrative Division. Your transport pod is programmed for a one-way trajectory. You will be provided with a standard survival pack. Your only mandate is to ensure your beacon remains active for 6 hours post-impact so the orbital grid can verify the atmospheric density metrics. After that, your file will be closed. No return trajectory? Leo asked, his voice entirely devoid of the panic Valen expected. That saves me the trouble of calculating the fuel weight for the ascent. But if I'm going down there to die for your paperwork, Commander, I have one condition. I want to take my own gear. No standard issue Academy survival kit. Just my personal pack from Sector 9 and my old recording rig. Valen let out a short, clicking sound that passed for a laugh among his kind. You wish to enter a Class 5 lethal environment with primitive mining scrap and a civilian broadcasting device? If it pleases your strange human sentimentality to accelerate your own demise, the Academy will not object. Your gear has been cleared simply because it holds 0 military value. Your launch window opens in 20 minutes, Cadet. Try not to die before the telemetry sinks. The descent was an unmitigated disaster by any military standard. The automated transport pod was a stripped-down metal shell designed for expendable cargo, lacking any internal dampeners. As it hit the upper stratosphere of planet X-90, the hull began to vibrate so violently that the rivets in the ceiling panels rattled like loose teeth. Alarms screamed in a piercing, two-tone sequence, warning of catastrophic hull heating and atmospheric friction overloads. Leo sat strapped into the rigid iron harness, his teeth clenched hard, holding his breath as the view through the structural viewport turned a violent shade of crimson. The pod fell like a stone dropped into an ocean of boiling mud. Through the window, the alien landscape rushed upward with terrifying speed. The surface was dominated by a dense, suffocating purple canopy, trees the size of skyscrapers, their massive, bulbous limbs twisting together like tangled knots of muscle tissue. The pod sheared through the upper branches with a series of deafening metallic cracks, the structural hull buckling inward as it collided with the dense organic matter. The final impact was a bone-shattering jar that threw Leo forward against his harness, knocking the air cleanly from his lungs as the pod plowed into the thick, spongy moss. For several minutes, the only sound was the ticking of the cooling exterior hull and the high-pitched hiss of the pod's blown hydraulic lines. Leo unbuckled his harness slowly, checking his limbs one by one. His shoulder was deeply bruised where the strap had cut in, but nothing was broken. He reached down into the footwell, retrieving his old canvas mining pack and the hover cam, which had survived the crash due to its reinforced internal housing. Stepping to the manual escape hatch, Leo turned the heavy iron wheel. The seals popped with a wet gasp, and the door fell outward. The air that rushed into the cabin was warm, incredibly thick, and smelled heavily of rotting vegetation and stagnant swamp water. It was a weight that settled instantly into the back of his throat. Leo stepped out onto the surface of X-90, his boots sinking 3 inches into a carpet of deep violet moss. He reached down, clicked his hover cam, and tossed it gently into the air. "Hey guys, welcome back to the channel," Leo said, his voice casual as he adjusted the straps of his canvas pack. "Today we are doing a literal unboxing of a designated death world. First impressions? The air is incredibly heavy. Feels exactly like a bad summer day back in the deep shafts of Sector 9 when the ventilation fans went offline. The smell is a solid mix of wet copper and old compost, but honestly, the scenery is a 10 out of 10 if you like dark purple aesthetics." As the faint light of the crimson sky began to bleed into deep, velvet darkness, the jungle around Leo transformed. The silent trees began to rustle, not from wind, but from a slow, deliberate contraction of their limbs. High above the canopy, strange, segmented structures began to open, releasing clouds of heavy, iridescent spores that drifted down through the air like glowing ash. Leo didn't waste time looking for a standard military clearance zone. He knew from his years in the mining sectors that attempting to clear an environment only made you a beacon for everything living in it. Instead of cutting down the purple brush to create an open camp, he looked for natural cover. He found it beneath the massive, exposed root system of a skyscraper-sized tree, where the ancient wood had twisted into a shallow, protective cave 3 feet off the ground. He crawled inside the dark space, pulling his old thermal survival blanket from his pack. Unlike the high-energy tactical heaters issued by the Academy, which projected a bright infrared signature visible to any predator with thermal vision, Leo's blanket was a passive, lead-woven fabric designed to trap heat entirely within its layers. It kept him warm without emitting a single watt of detectable radiation into the dark jungle. Sitting in the complete blackness of the root cave, Leo kept his hover cam floating just outside the entrance, its lens switched to low-light amplification mode. The video feed was being routed directly to his handheld data slate, which he kept shielded beneath his blanket. Rule number 1 of traveling in a hostile zone. Leo whispered into the microphone, his face illuminated only by the faint green backlight of his slate. Never try to build a fortress. The Taurian scout team that died here built a massive perimeter with high-energy laser fences. To the wildlife out here, that laser fence probably looked like a giant neon sign that said, "Free buffet." If you want to survive the night, you don't fight the darkness, you become part of it. The jungle suddenly went dead silent. The strange, clicking insects that had been chirping in the purple moss stopped their noise instantly. Through the low-light feed of the hover cam, Leo watched the violet brush 20 feet away begin to part. Two massive, glowing yellow eyes emerged from the shadows, positioned vertically rather than horizontally. The creature was huge, its presence announced by a sudden, intense heavy pressure in the air. The Gorgon had arrived. The creature drifted into the faint light of the glowing spores, revealing a form that defied standard galactic biological classifications. It was easily 10 feet long, low to the ground, with a thick, muscular torso covered in midnight blue fur that seemed to absorb the ambient light. Instead of standard legs, it moved on 6 multi-jointed limbs that ended in wide, silent pads, allowing its massive 800-pound frame to slide across the wet moss without making a single sound. Its head was wide and flat, dominated by 4 vertically aligned eyes that burned with a pale yellow luminescence. But what caught Leo's attention immediately were the pale, jagged lines cutting through the fur across its left shoulder and flank. They were distinct, unyielding marks of scar tissue, the undeniable signature of Class 4 corporate plasma burns. The Taurian scout team hadn't just built a perimeter, they had actively hunted this creature, leaving it with deep, permanent reminders of what happens when advanced technology enters its territory. The Gorgon stopped 10 feet from the root cave, its massive head swinging slowly from side to side. Its nostrils flared, tasting the air for the distinct chemical scent of fear, the spike of adrenaline that every prey animal produced when faced with an apex predator. Inside the cave, Leo forced his breathing to remain slow and rhythmic. He didn't reach for the low-grade mining rifle resting against his pack. He knew that the moment his hand tightened around the grip, his muscles would tense, his heart rate would climb, and the Gorgon's electromagnetic receptors would lock onto his position instantly. Instead, he slowly reached into the side pocket of his canvas pack and pulled out a thick, gray block of compressed synthetic salt meat, the standard, low-cost ration issued to human laborers in the Outer Rim. To humans, the ration was dry and excessively salty, but Leo knew from his studies of xenofauna that high-density salt blocks were an incredibly rare commodity on planets with heavy sulfur tables, where clean mineral sodium was consistently washed out of the soil by the acidic rain. He slid his hand out from beneath the thermal blanket, moving with agonizing slowness. He didn't throw the meat. He simply placed it on the violet moss just outside the lip of the root cave, letting the warm scent of the synthetic fat drift into the humid air. Rule number 2, Leo murmured, his voice a low, steady vibration. Respect the locals. This big guy isn't hunting because he's evil. He's hunting because someone came into his home with plasma cannons and left him with those scars. He thinks everything that smells like metal is an enemy. We're going to try a different approach. The Gorgon lowered its massive head, its vertically aligned eyes narrowing as its nostrils caught the sudden, sharp scent of the salt ration. It didn't pounce. It advanced one silent step at a time, its low torso nearly scraping the moss, its muscles visibly tensed to spring forward at the slightest sign of movement. It stopped directly over the gray block, its massive jaws opening to reveal rows of thin, translucent teeth that looked like shards of broken glass. It sniffed the meat for a long moment, its long, blue-tinted tongue darting out to lick the surface. The high concentration of mineral sodium instantly registered with its sensory organs. In an incredibly swift motion, the creature snapped up the ration, its powerful jaws crushing the dense block with a single, sharp crunch. The Gorgon stood still, its eyes rolling upward slightly as it processed the massive influx of salt and fats. Then, its head turned slowly toward the dark opening of the root cave. It could clearly see Leo sitting inside. The human was entirely visible in the dim light, but he wasn't moving, he wasn't reaching for a weapon, and his heart rate remained at a steady, resting pace. The distinct chemical marker of fear was completely missing from the air. For nearly 2 minutes, the human and the apex monster of Planet X-90 stared at each other through the dark. Then, with a low, rumbling huff that blew a cloud of warm, moisture-laden air into the cave, the Gorgon turned its massive body around. It didn't run. It simply slunk back into the purple brush, its midnight blue fur blending instantly into the shadows until it was gone. Deep within the subterranean command bunker of the Galactic Scout Academy, 3,000 light-years away, the automated monitoring terminal suddenly blinked. The death clock that had been assigned to Cadet Leo Vance did not register a cessation of life signs. Instead, a steady, low-bandwidth data stream began to override the corporate orbital grid. Junior Communications Officer Thals tapped his primary console with 2 of his 4 arms, his large compound eyes widening as the visual feed stabilized on his main monitor. On the screen, a human cadet was sitting comfortably inside a tree root, calmly cleaning the mud off his boots while a massive, 800-pound biological nightmare walked away peacefully in the background. "Commander Valen," Thals called out, his voice cracking with disbelief as he patched the signal through to the senior offices. "You need to see this immediately. The human, he isn't dead. He's broadcasting." By the morning of the 4th planetary rotation, Leo had transformed his temporary survival camp into an operational base. He had used his old mining knife to split several thick limbs of a fallen purple tree, using the dense, resinous bark to create a solid raised platform inside the root cave to keep his gear entirely clear of the damp, acidic soil. The crimson sky had cleared slightly, allowing a strange, pale orange light to filter down through the skyscraper canopy. Leo stood by the edge of a slow-moving river 50 yards from his camp. The water was a dark, milky green, bubbling faintly where it came into contact with the limestone banks. Standard corporate sensors marked this water as highly hazardous due to the heavy concentrations of sulfuric and tannic acids stripped from the local flora. Leo adjusted his hover cam so it hung directly over his shoulder, framing both his face and the river bank. He held a small, unvarnished wooden cup in his hand, filled with the murky green liquid. "Hey guys, welcome back," Leo said, addressing the floating lens with an easy smile. "Today we're talking about one of the biggest myths in the Galactic Scout Manual. The idea that an acidic water table is an automatic death sentence. Now, if you're a Taurian or a Vraxian, your calcium-based exoskeleton will react with this stuff instantly, which is why the Pickley team had their suits fall apart when their filters clogged. But human skin is a whole different story. We're mostly organic water and leather anyway. It might give you a mild rash if you swim in it for an hour, but it's not going to dissolve your fingers." He set the cup down on a flat stone, reaching into his canvas pack for a handful of thick, fibrous roots he had harvested from the base of the glowing purple ferns the previous afternoon. "This is what the locals call a silt root. It's incredibly bitter, and if you try to eat it raw, it'll lock up your throat. But look what happens when you drop it into the green river water." He dropped the crushed roots into the wooden cup. The milky green liquid instantly began to churn, a thick, dark precipitate settling rapidly to the bottom of the vessel while the water above it turned completely clear and still. "The silt root acts as a natural alkaline coagulant," Leo explained, lifting the clear water to his mouth and taking a long, steady drink. "It binds to the sulfuric compounds and drags them down to the bottom. It tastes a bit like old chalk and iron, but it's completely safe. You don't need a class of military filtration matrix to live here. You just need to know which plant is already doing the filtering for you." A low, deep vibration rattled the stones near his feet. Leo didn't even look up as the massive, midnight blue form of the Gorgon emerged from the tall fern brush, its 4 yellow eyes fixed intently on the human's canvas pack. The creature stopped 5 feet away, its massive tail swishing slowly against the purple moss with a heavy, rhythmic thud. It didn't growl. Instead, a low, mechanical-sounding hum vibrated within its massive chest, a sound that Leo had quickly realized was the equivalent of a feline purr, generated by the creature's internal electromagnetic organs when it was entirely relaxed. Speaking of the locals, Leo said, turning the hover cam toward the massive beast. This is Gorgon. I know the Academy database lists his species as a hyper-aggressive killer, but honestly, he's just an 800-pound territorial guard dog who really appreciates proper seasoning. Watch this. Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of cooked river fish. He had caught it using a simple copper wire hook and a piece of synthetic line from his pack, roasting it over a small, smokeless pit fire lined with limestone chunks to mask the thermal signature. The fish was pale and flaky, smelling heavily of primitive river oils. He won't eat it raw if I'm around anymore, Leo chuckled, tossing the cooked fish gently through the air. The Gorgon caught the morsel midair with an incredibly fluid snap of its jaws, its eyes closing briefly as it savored the roasted flavor. Humans figured out a few 100,000 years ago that cooking food breaks down the proteins and makes it taste better. Turns out, that rule applies to Death World predators too. Once you establish that you're a source of cooked snacks rather than competition, the whole hunting dynamic completely goes out the window. The Gorgon slouched down into the moss, its massive front paws tucked beneath its chest, looking remarkably like an oversized terrestrial pet as it watched Leo clean his wooden cup. It had effectively claimed Leo's camp as part of its own territory, and on Planet X-90, that claim meant absolute security. No other predator within 10 square kilometers would dare approach an environment that smelled so heavily of an active anthrax. Meanwhile, the open-frequency data stream was spreading like a virus across the galactic civilian network. Because Leo was using an old, unencrypted mining band protocol, designed for deep-crust communications where corporate encryption was useless, the signal wasn't passing through the Academy's private filters. It was hitting public relay stations across 3 neighboring solar systems. In crowded trading stations, inner-rim residential sectors, and civilian transport vessels, millions of beings were watching the live feed. They weren't seeing a terrifying horror show about a doomed cadet. They were watching a calm, resourceful human treating the universe's most feared planet like a quiet weekend camping trip. By the end of the second week, the political landscape of the Galactic Scout Academy had descended into complete chaos. Commander Valen stood in the high-tier briefing room, his face illuminated by a massive holographic display that projected a map of Planet X-90. The sector where Leo Vance had landed was no longer a blank red zone marked uninhabitable. It was surrounded by a blue ring indicating a stable, broadcasting civilian data node. This is an unacceptable breach of operational protocol, Balin barked, his upper manipulators slamming down onto the polished obsidian briefing table. The human was sent to fulfill a baseline technical requirement. Instead, he has turned a highly classified lethal sector into a public spectacle. The current viewership metrics on the civilian subspace bands exceed 40 million unique connections. The Xenobiology Department is demanding his raw logs. The Colonization Bureau is questioning our safety metrics, and the High Council is asking why a human cadet is thriving where my best soldiers perished. An administrative aide stood at the edge of the room, her antennae twitching nervously. Commander, the legal division has reviewed the open-frequency broadcast. Because Cadet Vance is utilizing an unclassified mining protocol from an older Earth colony tier, we have no legal basis to cut the transmission without violating the Inter-System Communication Act. Furthermore, Earth's diplomatic corps has just requested an emergency audience with the High Council. They are pointing out that under galactic law, if a species can demonstrate unassisted survival on an unclaimed world for more than 14 planetary rotations, they have the right to file for joint administrative settlement rights. Balin's stone-like skin turned a darker shade of gray. He is not surviving unassisted. He has somehow compromised the biological behavioral matrix of an apex predator. That beast is a weapon of nature, not a companion. The human has disrupted the environmental balance of that sector. If this continues, the corporate mining firms will pull their funding from our scout program, fearing that the planet will be declared a protected ecological zone. He turned back to the holographic display, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto the coordinates of the old abandoned research station located 20 kilometers from Leo's camp. The human has stated in his latest broadcast that he intends to trek to the old structural facility to salvage the data cores. He thinks he is on a holiday. We will allow him to reach the station. Once he is inside the metallic perimeter, the environment will change. We will send a heavy extraction team under the guise of an emergency rescue operation. They will secure the data cores, eliminate the biological threat, and bring the cadet back in chains for violating military discipline. The trek to the abandoned research station took Leo 3 planetary rotations. He moved with deliberate slowness, never pushing his physical limits, stopping every few hours to document the changing flora for his video stream. Behind him, always at a distance of 20 feet, the massive form of the Gorgon moved like a shadow through the purple ferns. The beast had become an effective early warning system. Whenever its midnight blue fur bristled or its vertical eyes shifted to a pale green hue, Leo knew to stop and wait until whatever deep jungle hazard had passed. On the morning of the 18th rotation, the forest abruptly ended. A wide, circular clearing stretched out before them, dominated by the massive, skeletal structure of the old Taurian research facility. The building was a series of interlocking modular cubes made of heavy military alloy, but it was now half consumed by thick, purple vines that clung to the metal walls like old muscles. The main blast doors hung open at a broken, twisted angle, one completely torn from its tracks as if something massive had forced its way inside years ago. Leo stopped at the tree line, his hover cam floating gently beside his head. He looked down at his data slate, then up at the dark, silent entrance of the facility. "All right guys, we've finally reached the objective," Leo said into the camera, his tone shifting from his usual casual humor to a more focused, analytical note. "This is the old class A research hub. The manual says this place was abandoned because the environment was too hostile to maintain structural integrity. Let's go see what really happened inside." He took a step forward into the clearing, but a sharp, vibrating rumble behind him made him pause. The Gorgon had stopped at the edge of the ferns. Its multi-jointed limbs were pressed low into the moss, its tail completely stiff, its 4 yellow eyes fixed on the metal structure with an expression of intense, primal hatred. The pale laser scars on its shoulder seemed to pulse against its dark fur as its muscles tensed. Leo walked back to the massive beast, reaching out his hand slowly until his fingers rested against the thick fur of its neck. The creature's skin was hot to the touch, vibrating with a high-frequency electromagnetic charge. "Hey, it's all right, big guy," Leo said softly, his voice steady as he looked into the monster's eyes. "I know this place smells like the people who hurt you. I know what they did. But those people are gone now. I need to go inside to finish my job, but you don't have to follow me into the metal. Wait here. Guard the perimeter. I'll be back before the sky turns red." The Gorgon let out a long, low huff, its eyes shifting back to a calm yellow. It didn't enter the clearing, but it sat down heavily in the moss, its massive head resting on its paws, its gaze fixed entirely on the broken blast doors. It was a silent sentinel, keeping watch over the human's only line of retreat. The air inside the research station was freezing, dry, and smelled intensely of ancient dust and decaying synthetic polymers. Leo's flashlight beam cut through the absolute darkness of the main corridor, illuminating overturned steel desks, shattered glass data terminals, and the discarded remains of advanced military equipment. He walked slowly, his boots clicking sharply against the bare metal floor plates, a sound that felt uncomfortably loud after weeks of walking on soft violet moss. The hover cam followed him faithfully, its lens panning across the scorched metal walls where deep, jagged claw marks had ripped cleanly through the structural alloy. "You see these marks?" Leo said to the camera, pointing his light at a section of torn bulkhead where 3-inch thick steel had been peeled back like paper. The official report said the facility was compromised by atmospheric corrosion. But that's a lie. These are claw marks from an Ursanthrax. The team inside panicked. They locked themselves in their high-tech boxes, turned their laser turrets to maximum power, and treated everything outside these walls as an invading army. They turned this place into a prison, and eventually, the environment broke down the door. He reached the primary command deck, a circular room filled with massive monitor banks that had long since gone dark. In the center of the room sat the main data vault, a reinforced titanium cylinder that held the classified research cores the Academy wanted recovered. Leo approached a smaller workstation nearby, wiping a thick layer of gray dust from a cracked personal logging terminal. Surprisingly, a faint blue indicator light was still flickering on the console, powered by an internal geothermal tap that ran deep into the planet's crust. He tapped the interface, bypassing the broken biometric scanners with a simple piece of copper wire from his pack, forcing the terminal to display the final text entries left by the facility's director. Day 41. Leo read aloud from the screen, his voice echoing in the empty metal room. The atmospheric scrubbers have failed for the third time. The technical units cannot patch the core without exposing their suits to the sulfur rain. The filters are degrading faster than our supply lines can replace them. 2 soldiers died today during a routine perimeter check, not from predators, but because their suit seals cracked from the humidity and their lungs burned out within minutes. We are trapped inside our own containment protocol. The beasts are waiting outside. They don't attack our walls. They simply watch us die from the inside. Leo shut down the terminal, his expression grim as he turned toward the main data vault. They didn't die because the planet was a killer, he said softly to the hovercam. They died because their technology separated them from the world. They spent all their time trying to keep X-90 out, instead of learning how to live with what was already here. They starved in their climate-controlled suits because they couldn't digest the local flora, while 20 feet outside their door, the silt roots were waiting to clean their water. With a sharp mechanical click, the primary data vault unlocked. Leo retrieved the 2 heavy, metallic data cores, each the size of a standard terrestrial brick, and slid them carefully into the center compartment of his canvas mining pack. The task was complete. The telemetry had been verified, the research had been recovered, and legally, his mandate on Planet X-90 was fulfilled. But before he could turn back toward the corridor, a sudden, high-intensity vibration rattled the structural floor plates. It wasn't the rhythmic purr of the Gorgon, nor was it the slow shifting of the jungle trees. It was the distinct, low-frequency rumble of heavy atmospheric thrusters cutting through the stratosphere directly overhead. Through the shattered structural viewports of the command deck, Leo watched a massive, slate-gray Taurian heavy transport vessel drop down through the red clouds. The ship didn't land with the caution of a scout pod. It utilized high-energy repulsor fields to blast away the skyscraper limbs, burning a massive, smoking scar into the violet canopy as it settled directly into the center of the clearing outside the station. The ship's heavy boarding ramp slammed down into the moss before the engines had even finished their cooling sequence. 6 heavily armored soldiers stepped out onto the surface, their forms completely encased in thick, bulky class A environmental suits that made them look like mechanized statues. In their primary manipulators, they carried high-energy plasma cannons, weapons designed for scorched earth containment operations, their containment cells glowing with an angry, unstable blue light. At the rear of the deployment line stood Commander Valen himself, his stone-like skin visible through the thick transparent faceplate of his command suit. He didn't look at the jungle around him. His eyes were fixed on the entrance of the research facility. Inside the command deck, Leo looked down at his handheld data slate. The open civilian broadcast band was still fully operational, the hover cam recording everything in high definition. The viewership metrics had just crossed 60 million. "Well guys," Leo said, his voice dropping to a hard, cold register as he checked the slide of his mining rifle. "Looks like our rescue team has arrived. But they didn't bring survival gear. They brought plasma cannons. This is no longer a travel vlog. This is a corporate repossession." He unclipped the hover cam from his shoulder, letting it float slightly higher in the air to capture a wider angle of the room. Rule number 3 of the Outer Rim. When someone shows up to your camp with that much iron, they aren't planning to leave any witnesses behind. Let's go see if the commander wants to be on camera. As Leo stepped out through the broken blast doors of the research facility, the warm, humid air of the jungle hit him like a physical wall, contrasting sharply with the freezing interior of the station. He stood at the top of the metallic boarding steps, his canvas pack slung over one shoulder, his old mining rifle resting loosely across his chest. Beside him, the hover cam spun slowly, its lens tracking the line of armored soldiers who had formed a semicircle around the exit. Commander Vance stepped forward, his heavy containment boots sinking deep into the violet moss, the mechanical servos in his legs groaning under the weight of his armor. He raised his primary manipulator, pointing a heavy plasma pistol directly at Leo's chest. "Hand over the data cores, Cadet Vance," Valen's voice bellowed through his suit's exterior speakers, distorted by a harsh electronic crackle. "Your mission is concluded. You are officially under arrest for the unauthorized distribution of classified military telemetry and systemic insubordination." "Insubordination?" Leo asked, a thin, cold smile appearing on his face as he gesticulated to the floating hover cam beside him. "I followed every line of your protocol, Commander. I landed, I verified the coordinates, and I recovered your data. The fact that 60 million citizens are currently watching you point a military weapon at a cadet who just proved your entire survival manual is wrong. Well, that's just a matter of public education." "Silence!" Valen roared, his lower mandibles flaring in a surge of rage that registered instantly on his suit's internal metrics display. "You have compromised this sector. You have treated a lethal biological threat as a companion, creating a false narrative that this death world is fit for colonization. This world belongs to the state's mineral division, and we will not allow a scrap merchant from Sector 9 to disrupt our development rights." He turned his head slightly, addressing the heavy weapon units behind him. "Locate the apex beast. It was tracked to this sector. Eliminate it with maximum thermal dispersion. We will not leave this planet until the biological variable is removed entirely from the record." A sudden, sharp screech tore through the air from the edge of the clearing. The purple fern brush erupted outward as the Gorgon leapt into the open space. The monster's midnight blue fur was standing completely on end, its 6 limbs carving deep furrows into the ground as it sprinted toward the soldiers, its 4 yellow eyes burning with a wild, uncontrollable light. It had seen the plasma weapons, it had recognized the blue glow of the energy cells, and its ancient memories of pain had completely overtaken its calm behavioral matrix. "Fire!" Commander Valen screamed, his voice reaching a frantic, high-pitched register through the speakers. "Maximum output! Burn the beast down!" The clearing erupted into a blinding display of violence. The 3 armored soldiers unleashed their plasma cannons, bright arcs of superheated blue energy cutting through the humid air with a series of deafening explosions. The moss where the plasma hit was instantly vaporized, turning into clouds of thick, choking black smoke that smelled of burned sugar and sulfur. The Gorgon was incredibly fast, its multi-jointed limbs allowing it to dodge the primary lines of fire with fluid, serpentine twists of its torso. But the sheer volume of energy was too high. A stray plasma bolt clipped its rear flank, tearing through the midnight blue fur and leaving a smoking, red-hot gash across its muscle tissue. The beast let out a piercing howl of agony, a sound that vibrated so intensely it cracked the remaining glass panels in the research station behind Leo. The monster fell to the moss, rolling over twice as it tried to escape the heat, its front smaller limbs flailing in the air as its powerful electromagnetic field began to fluctuate wildly, sending waves of static across Leo's data slate. Yet, even in its pain, the Gorgon didn't retreat into the deep jungle. It scrambled back onto its paws, positioning its massive, Zygmi frame directly between the soldiers and the steps where Leo stood, its jaw open, ready to make a final, suicidal stand to protect its source of cooked snacks and safety. Inside the tactical helmets of the Taurian soldiers, target locks began to blink. They leveled their plasma cannons for a synchronized terminal volley, aiming straight for the creature's exposed chest plates. Leo didn't hesitate. He didn't run back inside the metal bunker to save his own skin. He reached into his canvas pack, pulled out his old mining knife, the one wrapped in copper wire, and dropped his rifle to the deck. Rule number 4 of the Outer Rim, Leo said, his voice surprisingly calm as he looked directly into the hover cam, which was capturing every second of the confrontation for the live galactic feed. When a friend stands in front of a plasma bolt for you, you don't run away. You change the rules of the game. With a swift, practiced motion born of 1,000 emergency repairs in the underground shafts, Leo sprinted down the steps, bypassing the soldiers entirely, and dove straight toward the exposed mechanical underbelly of the heavy Taurian transport ship resting behind them. The Taurian soldiers were completely focused on the Zygmi beast in front of them, their heavy containment suits limiting their peripheral vision and reaction times. They never expected a lone human cadet to charge past their weapon lines without a firearm. Leo slid beneath the massive, slate-gray hull of the transport ship, his back scraping against the wet violet moss as he found the primary external maintenance panel, a structural feature common to every standard-tier heavy vessel used by the Academy. The panel was protected by a simple magnetic latch designed for authorized technical units. Leo didn't have a technical key, but he had his father's old mining knife. He rammed the reinforced steel tip of the blade directly into the seam of the latch, using his shoulder as a lever. The cheap corporate lock, never designed to withstand the raw, physical leverage of a desperate human laborer, sheared completely off with a sharp metallic pop. Inside the panel sat the primary fuel valve generator switch, a delicate mechanical assembly that controlled the flow of liquid plasma to the ship's primary weapon capacitors and main thrusters. The system was managed by an intricate array of software safety protocols, but the actual physical valve was still a basic mechanical gate. Leo grabbed the thick copper grounding wire uncoiled from his pack and jammed it directly across the two main power terminals of the valve assembly, creating a sudden, massive short circuit that bypassed the onboard computers entirely. A bright flash of green sparks erupted from the panel, burning the tips of Leo's fingers, but he didn't let go. Above him, inside the ship's engineering core, the safety relays interpreted the short circuit as a catastrophic fuel line rupture. The automated emergency subroutines engaged instantly. With a loud, pneumatic clunk that echoed through the entire clearing, the ship's primary weapon systems went completely offline, the blue glow of the soldiers' plasma cannons dying out instantly as their power cells were drained back into the central reservoir to prevent an explosion. "What is happening?" Valen's voice screamed over the comms, his plasma pistol clicking uselessly as the internal display flashed a red, "System failure" warning. "Check your connections. Why are the weapons cold?" The three armored soldiers lowered their useless cannons, their heads turning in confusion toward their silent transport ship. The tactical advantage they had held a second ago had vanished completely, destroyed not by an alien army, but by a single piece of copper wire jammed into a maintenance box. The Gorgon didn't waste the opportunity. The moment it realized the burning blue arcs of energy had ceased, it lunged forward with explosive power. It didn't use its teeth. It used the sheer, raw physical mass of its 800-pound frame. The monster collided with the lead soldier, its massive paws slamming into the chest plate of the heavy containment suit with the force of a kinetic strike. The metal alloy buckled under the impact, and the soldier was thrown 20 feet across the clearing, crashing into the thick fern brush like a discarded toy. The remaining two soldiers panicked, dropping their useless cannons and retreating toward the boarding ramp of the transport ship, their heavy boots slipping on the wet moss as they scrambled to find safety inside the hull. Valen stood alone in the center of the clearing. His pistol dropped to his side, his four eyes wide with terror through his transparent faceplate as the massive, midnight blue form of the Ursanthrax stepped over him, its jaws inches from his helmet. Leo crawled out from beneath the ship, his hands covered in black grease and copper burns, but his expression remained completely steady. He walked over to the Zygmi beast, reaching up to gently tap its muzzle until the creature stepped back slightly, its low rumble shifting from a wild screech back to a deep, mechanical purr. Leo reached down, picked up Valen's dropped data slate, and held it up to the floating hover cam. The screen was rolling with text messages, official alerts, and high-tier council mandates. The public live stream had just crossed 80 million connections, and the Galactic High Council had officially stepped in. "Commander Valen," Leo said, his voice carrying clearly over the silent clearing. "The High Council just issued an emergency injunction. Your mission has been declared an illegal corporate intervention. Earth's diplomatic administration has filed for sole protective rights over this entire sector, citing my logs as definitive proof of sustainable human settlement potential. You aren't rescuing me, Commander. And you aren't clearing this planet. You're officially trespassing on my base." Valen stared at Leo through his visor, his mandibles trembling with a mix of fear and complete professional ruin. He didn't speak. He simply turned and scrambled up the boarding ramp, his remaining soldiers closing the hatch behind him as the transport ship's backup thrusters groaned to life, slowly lifting the massive vessel away from the surface and retreating back into the crimson clouds. 6 months after the transport ship retreated into the stratosphere, the clearing around the old research facility had changed completely. The skeletal metal structure was no longer a symbol of death and corporate failure. It had been cleared of dust, its broken blast doors repaired with local resin-treated timber, and its internal lights glowing steadily with clean geothermal energy. The sky above Planet X-90 remained a permanent, deep twilight of red and purple clouds, but the jungle no longer felt silent or unwelcoming. A narrow, wool-worn path cut through the violet moss, leading from the base steps down to the green river bank where Leo had set up his initial camp. Leo stood on the newly constructed wooden porch of the station, wearing his old patched mining boots and a simple, dark green linen shirt issued by Earth's colonial administration. He held a large, steaming mug of boiled silt root tea in his right hand. Beside him, floating at eye level, was a brand-new, high-definition civilian broadcasting unit, a gift from the thousands of viewers who had funded his channel's continuation. "Hey guys, welcome back to the channel," Leo said, looking into the lens with a calm, satisfied smile. "It's been 6 months since our last major update, and things are looking a bit different around here. The Academy officially closed my cadet file, but they had to send me a new contract as the primary technical liaison for Sector 90. Turns out, when 80 million people like your travel vlogs, the bureaucrats find a way to make it legal." He turned the camera toward the wide clearing below. A small, modular habitation unit had been erected 50 yards away, its solar collectors tracking the faint orange light filtering through the skyscraper canopy. 2 human technicians in light, breathable work uniforms were busy assembling a secondary hydroponics rack near the tree line. "Our first small team of human pioneers arrived 2 weeks ago," Leo explained, taking a slow sip from his mug. "Just 5 people from my old mining colony. People who know how to live when the technology is low and the air is heavy. We've already started our first crop of Earth hybrid tomatoes in the local soil table, and honestly, they're loving the high sulfur content. We aren't building a fortress out here. We're just setting up a neighborhood." A massive, familiar shape drifted out from beneath the purple ferns. The Gorgon walked slowly into the clearing, its midnight blue fur completely healed where the plasma burn had been, leaving only a thin, silver scar that added to its impressive presence. Behind it, stumbling through the violet moss on clumsy limbs, were 2 small, 3-foot-long cubs, their fur a lighter shade of blue, their tiny vertical eyes blinking curiously at the new human structures. The massive beast approached the porch, its tail swishing gently, its deep internal organs generating a purr so powerful it made the wooden railing of the deck vibrate. The two small cubs scrambled up the steps, their tiny claws clicking softly against the resin-treated timber before they flopped down directly over Leo's boots, biting playfully at the old copper stitches. "Gorgon brought some company today," Leo laughed, shifting his feet carefully so as not to disturb the cubs. "This is his family. His mate still stays deep in the volcanic ridge to the east, but these little guys are already regular visitors at the base." Pro tip for any future colonists: if you leave a bowl of roasted river carp scraps on the porch, you don't have to worry about the local insect population ever invading your kitchen. The kids take care of everything. He reached down, gently scratching one of the cubs behind its secondary mandibles. The little creature let out a high-pitched, mechanical clicking sound of absolute contentment, rolling onto its back to expose its soft, blue-furred belly. "The xenobiology department back at the Corps sent me a 30-page document last week," Leo continued, looking back up at the lens. "They wanted to know the exact scientific methodology I used to domesticate an Ursanthrax. They used words like behavioral modification matrices and neurological alignment protocols. I sent them back a single sentence. I gave him a salt ration and didn't shoot him with a plasma cannon." He stood up, walking to the edge of the porch to look out over the vast, alien landscape. The purple forest stretched out for thousands of square kilometers, its bioluminescent veins starting to pulse with a faint light as the planetary dusk settled in. In the distance, a massive herd of six-legged herbivores moved slowly through a clearing, completely unbothered by the presence of the human colony. "The real mistake the people before us made was simple," Leo said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet clearing. "They thought they were superior to the world. They brought their own atmosphere, their own water, and their own hatred, and they expected the universe to bow down to their technology. But humanity didn't survive Earth because we were the strongest or the most advanced. We survived because we were stubborn, we were flexible, and we knew how to make friends with the monsters when the nights got cold." 2 years later, the settlement on Planet X-90 had officially outgrown its designation as a mere research outpost. The Galactic Council's cartographic grid now marked the coordinates as New Sector 9, the first successful human-fauna cooperative colony in the Outer Rim. The population had reached 32 permanent residents, mostly families from the old fringe mining worlds who preferred the thick, vital air of the purple jungle to the dead, sterile atmosphere of the Inner Rim corporate sectors. 3 more modular domes had been integrated into the central research structure, connected by open-air wooden boardwalks that allowed the local wildlife to pass beneath them without disrupting their migratory paths. Leo Vance sat in the main command office of the facility, his fingers tapping lazily against the glass interface of a modern data console. He was no longer a cadet. His official title was Colony Administrator, though everyone in the settlement still just called him the tour guide. The office walls were lined with wooden shelves holding his collection of interesting mineral stones, dried alien flora, and several old, scratched hover cams from his early vlogging days. Through the wide, double-paned structural viewport behind his desk, he could see the entire valley. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in beautiful layers of deep amber and gold, while the planet's 3 small moons began to rise through the purple clouds. The automated comms terminal on his desk chimed with a low, respectful tone. It was a direct, high-priority link from the Galactic Expansion Bureau, no longer marked with the red warnings of a military court-martial, but with the gold seals of official diplomatic correspondence. Leo tapped the screen, and the familiar holographic form of retired Commander Hayes appeared in the center of the room. The old human officer looked much more relaxed than he had during his days at the academy, his uniform replaced by a simple, comfortable civilian travel cloak. "Administrator Vance," Hayes said, his voice carrying a warm, respectful tone. "I just reviewed the latest economic and ecological reports from your sector. The High Council has officially approved your proposal for the Southern Continent expansion. They are calling your settlement methodology the Vance Model for hostile world integration. 5 other species have already requested human technical advisors to help them reopen their own abandoned Death World sectors. Leo leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip from a mug of fresh, colony-grown tomato juice. That's great news, Commander. But tell them we're only sending people who know how to use a shovel and a fishing line. If they send me any more theoretical scientists with laser barriers, I'm going to let Gorgon chew on their data slates.